Understanding and empathy are two common persuasion techniques, but they're not always helpful. What I want to illustrate in this video with my own life experience is why sometimes limiting your empathy and limiting your understanding are actually better in terms of persuasion. Let's take a look. So as I've discussed in other videos, I've always been the type of friendly, relatable person in my everyday life, ever since I was young. But the problem with this is that you have too much empathy. And this can be a good thing because you can really understand people's problems, what they're going through, and what their issues are. But the problem is, when you understand too much about their life, they can use that as a justification to get you to make more concessions. What I mean by this is the following. Let's say that you're pitching a service and the price is what it is, no exceptions, and you don't know anything about your prospect client's life path. But then someone says, it's been tough and we really don't have the financial availability right now. If you don't even understand this, then you don't put yourself in a position to make a concession because you don't care about their life circumstances. But if you have too much empathy, which is my case, what may happen is because I tell you a story and sing you a song, then suddenly you find yourself thinking, oh, I should make an exception for this person. And you find yourself making concessions just because you understand their problems, okay? Nowadays, I even tell myself, I don't want to understand their problems or their issues because the moment that I do, then I'm going to make an exception and I'm going to hurt myself. So let's cover empathy in general terms. Empathy can be a good persuasion weapon because what happens is, by understanding the other side, you make it seem like whatever you're pitching or whatever you're saying is more tailored to them. So for example, if they say that they grew up in a specific small town and they had this specific experience, so when you recommend something to them, you can say something like, hey, this is the type of thing that my clients from small towns with similar upbringing would actually use. So what ends up happening is that by understanding more about the person's life story, their needs, their goals, you have more useful information that you can then use to communicate, to pitch, or to sell. And this is usually a good thing. But the problem with it is that the more that you understand the other side, the more that you are going to be tempted to make a concession to them, especially if you're a very empathetic person like me. So lots of mirror neurons. When you see someone in an awkward position, you feel awkward as well. When you see someone in a negative position, you want to be positive to help them. When you have this kind of sense of wanting to make other people comfortable and serve them, every single time that they tell you something which is not helpful to you, you are going to want to make a concession in order to help them. So naturally, there is a balance here, and there is no right answer. You don't want to be the type of person who is very cold and who doesn't really care about anything in terms of their life story or their conditions, and you always say the same thing or sell the same thing, because that sounds very impersonal. There are niches where it's good to actually do this, right? For example, if you are a consultant or a doctor, or if you provide any other service which can be compromised by liking the person or relating to them, this is perfect. But usually, this is an extreme. And the other extreme is when you're very friendly. That is, you really understand them, you build a relationship. And because of that, what you're pitching is super targeted, or the communication is super targeted, but also every single thing that you understand in terms of their problems or their issues is going to make you compromise to make them feel better. So you want to be somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. So if you are the type of person who is very empathetic, there are usually two main types of techniques that you can use to remove yourself from the situation. So the first is by drawing personal boundaries, and the second is by literally removing yourself from their issue or their problem. So let's start with boundaries. Personal boundaries are actually very simple. They consist of some form of saying, I'm very sorry, but I do not tolerate this, I do not accept this, or I cannot do this. So for example, if someone is trying to get you to change your mind or to change your behavior by saying, I have this problem, I have this issue, whatever it is, what you want to do is the following. When a person is too empathetic, they assume, I understand the person and I must change my behavior. These two are usually linked. What you want to do is you want to break that link. You want to say, I understand the situation, but I cannot change my behavior. For example, if a prospect client is saying, hey, I have this difficulty, I don't really have the finances, you want to say, I do understand it, but I'm sorry, I cannot make a discount. In other words, you are separating understanding their situation from changing your behavior due to that situation. And by the way, this is also how bullying works. Bullies bully people that have a lot of empathy or are very friendly precisely because they make them feel guilty or they intimidate them into changing their behavior. And the person who is very friendly assumes, I have to change my behavior because they're intimidating me or they're making me feel guilty. That's literally how bullying works. So that's the first technique. You use personal boundaries. You say in some form, I'm very sorry, even though I understand this, I cannot change this. Or I still have to do this my way. It's standing up for yourself, but in a very polite, in a very subtle manner. You're not aggressive, you're just defending yourself. The second technique is to literally remove yourself from the situation. That is, when someone is trying to get you into a situation which is their problem, you're politely saying, "This has nothing to do with me." Or maybe in more polite words than what I just said. So for example, in our case, if a prospect client is saying, "Hey, we had these financial problems, we had this issue, can you make a discount?" You can say, "I really understand the situation. Unfortunately, it's an unrelated matter. I understand your situation, and I understand your life story. However, the payment is a completely different thing." And this happens a lot with people who are very needy or who are trying to be manipulative, right? They try and get you to change behavior because of their problems. And what you want to say is exactly this. For example, someone saying, "Hey, don't give that presentation because you're going to be promoted, and I'm not going to be promoted because I'm in competition with you." There are people who would actually say this, by the way. I'm not making it up. So what you want to say is something like, "Hey, I really understand your life story, I understand your point of view, but this is a different issue. The two are not related. I'm going to do my work, or I'm going to do what I was going to do, and I do understand your problem, but it's a different issue, and it's not related to this." And this is funny because in my own personal life, I've been very empathetic, and I'm trying to be a little bit less empathetic because I'm kind of a sucker for a sob story. And I even have a client who is a negotiation client who uses this against me. He's like, he wants to get a discount. So every single time at the end of the contract, he starts saying things like, "Oh, you know that last semester hasn't been good, my salary is not that high," and immediately my sensor starts to trip, and I start thinking, I know what this guy's doing. And I'm very proud of him as a negotiator, but I start thinking, hey, he is playing me to a point. So this is something else that you can think of, by the way. You can think that every sob story, every life story, every single thing that they tell you, about their grievances, about their problems, you can consider that it can be manipulative in a way, because it may be true, but it may also be the case where the person is just shamelessly trying to manipulate you into lowering a price or doing something that you would otherwise not do. So it's very important to be able to remove yourself from that situation. And for people who are very empathetic, this is hell, by the way. To have that capability to look a person in the eyes and say, I understand your problem and I want to do something about it, but I can't do it. This is very, very difficult in everyday life. So I've got a little bit better at it. And this is the lesson here, right? When you have too much empathy, you are going to have the tendency to give things to people or to make concessions, even though you should not do them because they're not part of your professional activity, or just because you should not change your behavior because somebody else is feeling bad about it. Unless you are the cause of that behavior, but that's not what we're talking about here, okay? So these are some thoughts on why limiting empathy can be important in this type of situation. When you have too much empathy, true, you are going to understand every single thing about their life, and you are going to collect a gold mine of information in terms of their desires, their needs, and their personal information. But the problem is that every single part of the story which is negative or which manipulates you emotionally is going to make you want to change your behavior because of this. So by limiting your empathy and drawing those boundaries or just removing yourself from the situation, you are saying, hey, there are two things that could be done here. I can understand you and I can change my behavior because I understand you. But I'm only going to do one of them because they are not connected, they're different. So you want to show, I do understand where you're coming from, but you also want to say, I'm not going to change my behavior just because I understand you. If you've enjoyed the video, consider liking and subscribing, and remember to check out our channel for more communication, negotiation, sales, and other techniques in multiple areas of life. Thank you so much for watching.